Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb might be considered the best quarterback wide receiver duo in the NFL, but who else in this offense is going to step up for the Cowboys? We dig into the 2024 fantasy outlook for the entire Dallas Cowboys offense on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. I am one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk. When I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL, fantasy, betting, all the off-season content you would want at sportingnews.com.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So we're still going through our 32 NFL teams. We've made it all the way through all the NFC West teams, all the way through all the NFC North teams. And we have two final NFC East teams to get to this week, the Cowboys and the Commanders. We're going to start with the Cowboys today, and then we'll be posting our Commanders episode on Wednesday. But with the Cowboys, I mean, they're loaded, right? We're at the top. You got your Dak Prescott and your CeeDee Lamb, and they pretty much just dominate the league in the regular season. They've had a great record in the regular season for multiple years now, struggling in the playoffs, but last year averaged nearly 30 points per game. That led the NFL. They ranked fourth in fantasy points per game. Dak Prescott finished as the quarterback 4 in fantasy points per game, while CeeDee Lamb finished as the wide receiver 2 or 1, depending on the scoring format you played in. And then there's also Jake Ferguson there at tight end, as finished as tight end 9. They did lose some offensive line pieces this offseason. They lost Tony Pollard, brought back Zeke Elliott, but really didn't do a lot else, right? So let's dig into Dak Prescott here. Finished so well in the second half of the season, right? Really just past week 6. It was the first 5 weeks of the year that started so slow for Dak Prescott. Do you see him performing like he did in 3/4 of the year last year?
Well, there's a couple things at play here. Is that this team hasn't improved too much in the running game. I think they wanted to run better last year, but it didn't materialize without Ezekiel Elliott. I don't think just bringing back Zeke is going to say, okay, we're going to run the ball now. So I think it caught people off guard a little bit because you had the addition of Brian Schottenheimer replacing Kellen Moore, who's now at the rival Eagles, and you had Mike McCarthy. So you thought, okay, Schottenheimer in the past has run the ball there a little bit in Seattle, but the other thing they did was pass it, throwing off the run. So again, they're in the same situation. I don't see how they're a better running team this year without Tony Pollard in the mix. Their offensive line has taken some hits. Tyron Smith had to be moved on from here. Tyler Biadasz, the center, is also gone. Zach Martin is probably on his last season here. So it's a lot that's going on with the Cowboys up front with their running game. So you'd think Dak is going to throw for heavy volume. Excuse me. On top of everything that, Michelle. Okay, let me get to this in a second. Dan Quinn is gone. So there's my transition there. So the defense is going to be worse, right? I don't know what happened there, but maybe it's just I'm getting a little disappointed in this Cowboys team. I think it's going to be a little bit of a downturn. But that says if their defense is not as good, and the running game is not going to be that good, that Dak is going to have to keep throwing for a high volume, even if he doesn't have some receivers he knows. Michael Gallup is gone, but still there's a lot of weapons there. We mentioned Lamb and Ferguson, and Brandon Cooks is still in the mix. So there's plenty of weapons here. And I just think he's going to have to keep chucking. I think of all the, quote, passing quarterbacks are not just going to take off and run, he's right up there at the price. Right now, he's going QB9, maybe just in terms of worrying about the entire offense. But that's 5 spots down for an environment that's going to help him throw more and produce more. So we'll see how that plays out, but I can't see it dropping off that much. I guess people are looking at the weapons, but I'm looking at the volume. I don't see how that gets curbed.
And it's not like his weapons got taken away. It's the same weapons. No. And from week 6 through 18, week 6 through 18 last year, it was just dominance. He was the quarterback 1 in points per game during that span. It was at 23.7 points per game, with Josh Allen second at 22.8. So almost a full point per game more than Josh Allen to take that quarterback one spot. And we've seen it now for a handful of years, right? He had one down year, and it was 2022, had dealt with some injuries. But in 2021, he was quarterback 8 in points per game. In 2020, he was quarterback 1 in points per game. Only 5 games played, but still. And then in 2019, he was quarterback 4 in points per game. So I don't really understand why his cost is quarterback 9, because that's just not going to happen this year if he stays healthy, and they're going to pass a ton, like you said. So I personally think his cost is just so extremely low. I would expect him to be on many of my teams if he does end up falling there in the drafts that I'm in. But when you're looking at ADP right now, so like even Joe Burrow is going ahead of Dak Prescott. Can you explain like where that makes sense? Is it just because he has both Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, and Dak only has CeeDee Lamb?
Yeah, that's the flip side of this, right? I mean, because Dak, there was a lot of injuries. Burrow was not available for much of the year, and he was struggling out of the gate. Let's keep that in mind. So that hurt his numbers early when they were trying to figure out that passing offense a little bit with Burrow and the contract. So it was tough there. So Burrow, I guess, is esteemed as making a rebound here, as well as some other passers that we look at. But we automatically say that Dak can be no higher than the QB4, right? Because we start with Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts and possibly Patrick Mahomes and possibly Lamar Jackson. So those tell us that he's going to drop a little bit. And so the question is, how far does he drop, and does he go lower than the Burrow range right now? So I think overall Burrow has more touchdown upside here. And again, as I've talked about it before, the scoring could go up, but there could be just guys who put up the better numbers overall, where Dak could be the same type of score. There could be some guys who just are up there that score a little more. So what that says is Dak is still a good value. If there's not too much difference between those guys that are jumping him right now, that are staying healthy and producing, and Dak, then he's a good value. Then you don't need to reach for the guy that's a few points better when you can add some better talent at other positions, come back and still get a pretty good read here at quarterback. So yeah, just don't underestimate Dak. I think he's just not exciting, right? To some people, I think Joe Burrow, we've seen him get to the Super Bowl. He has a high ceiling. Some of these other quarterbacks are just a little bit more exciting, where I think if you want to say Dak, I want to say floor, I'm going here. I could get exactly what I have from last year. I'm going there. That's fine. But with the upside wise, I can see why you wouldn't want to just, lock into Dak Prescott right there.
Yeah, and when I would much rather prefer Dak Prescott to Joe Burrow. Let me ask you, would you rather Dak Prescott at 62-ish overall, or CJ Stroud at 46 overall? So you can get Dak Prescott about 2 rounds later. Which one would you feel comfortable with going? Would you pay up for Stroud or just wait on Dak?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Stroud and Dak, I mean, what's the difference? Not that much. I mean,
The difference
you
was
got one
Dak
more
scored
weapon.
way more fantasy points.
Right. I mean, in terms of, I guess you had Stephon Diggs, but does Stephon Diggs move the needle that much more for CJ Stroud? He's not going to run all that more. And Dak has proved he can run and score if he needs to do that part of his game. So, yeah, I think I like the upside of Burrow a little bit more. But when we get to the combination of, say, CJ Stroud and Anthony Richardson, I feel a lot more comfortable with Dak a little bit behind. So, I'm not saying you drop Dak all that much. I think QB7 is still pretty good for him, given that there's going to be more quarterbacks in the mix. But yeah, I mean, if it's apples to apples in terms of a pocket passing quarterback that's going to have volume, I'm going to go with Dak. And I also think the Texans are a better over team. They should be able to run and play defense a little bit to help CJ Stroud a little bit, so the numbers can go away, where I think the Cowboys are going to lean heavily once more on Dak, and they're going to make him earn that next contract here that he'll likely sign only in 2025.
I have one more question for you for Dak. I'm going to give you 3 guys, and you tell me who you'd rather have. They're all going in about an 8-pick span, right?
Okay.
Jordan Love, Kyler Murray, or Dak Prescott. How would you rank those 3?
I think I go Jordan Love, Dak Prescott, and Kyler Murray. That's how I'm going to go.
It's funny because I think I'd go Kyler Murray, Dak Prescott, Jordan Love.
Okay.
But I do like all 3. So this is really a year, like, I am not reaching on a quarterback this year. I'm not reaching for the Hurts or the Josh Allens. I think all 3 of these guys can be really, really great. And then even Brock Purdy, I love later on too. So I'm waiting for these guys. There's too many good options late.
Yeah, I think with Prescott, you're just wondering, okay, now you can look at it on the other side. Okay, Prescott is a better value than Stroud and some of these guys above, but are these guys behind Dak that we like just as much? Way would go. So you could go, how low could you go with quarterback and feel good about that? But again, maybe another reason we should be doing 2 QB and super flex leagues, especially here in 2024. But yeah, I think Dak might be the scoring around the same, but he could be passed by a few, and that could cause him to slide more so than his production in relation to his ranking in the finish here as a fantasy quarterback. We'll get into his weapons, his key weapons, CeeDee Lamb and Jake Ferguson. Lamb still waiting on his contract. Hopefully it'll be here soon. And his top tight end and what their outlook is, as well as if there's any other values here in the last two segments. All right, it is 2-0 already in the NBA Finals. You have the Celtics looking good, but we know the Mavericks maybe could make a run here and make it interesting. So we know that's on the table. You also have the Oilers and Panthers just getting started with the Stanley Cup Finals. Well, if you want to get on the action here with FanDuel, this is the right time to do so because summertime is here. There's baseball, but NBA Finals, Stanley Cup Finals are still here and more. You can bet it all and on all of it at FanDuel. New customers get $200 in bonus bets right now with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet everything from the finals MVP to who's going to hit one out of the park. So a lot of good stuff here in the summer as we work toward the All-Star break. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. That's FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Check it out now to FanDuel.com/lockedon to take advantage of a lot of great offers. All right, Michelle, let's continue the show. CeeDee Lamb is going to get paid soon, but we know he will get paid elite money because he was the wide receiver 2, wide receiver 1, depending how you score it last year in fantasy. That makes him an elite go-to guy in reality. So let's break it down here. What does he do to build on last season's monster numbers that we saw over everyone else?
So I don't even know it's so much that he has to build upon, right? It was the same thing with Dak. The first 5 weeks just started slow. Week 6 through 18, it's not that he was the wide receiver 1 in that span. He was the wide receiver 1 by so much. So he was averaging 23 fantasy points per game in half PPR leagues from week 6 through 18. The next closest was Tyreek Hill at 18 points per game. He was scoring 5 more points per game than any other wide receiver from week 6 through 18. That's a massive, massive chunk of time. Now you might say, is there any room for growth? But I don't really think we need room for growth, right? He had 181 targets last year. There's no reason for that to go down this season. It's still him, but there might even be room for it to increase. Maybe. I mean, we've seen crazier seasons. There's Calvin Johnson in 2012. He had 204 targets. Julio Jones had 203 targets in 2015. Handful of wide receivers in the 190s. Cooper Kupp was just there in 2021. So it could even still increase a little bit. Now, do you think it's fair that he's going wide receiver 1 off draft boards, right? He's pretty much going as a 102 right after CMC. Do you think that's a fair price for him and accurate? Because I do. I think if we're going with a wide receiver first, it's going to be CeeDee Lamb.
Yeah, what I like about CeeDee Lamb, and I really liked him and compared him to DeAndre Hopkins coming out of school there at Oklahoma, I think he can line up anywhere and do anything. And he's a really tough guy to cover. You can put him inside. He is never going to be schemed out of a game by double teams. And that's what I like about CeeDee Lamb, that he's wiry. He can run great routes. He's got pretty good hands. He's now developed excellent chemistry with Dak Prescott. So he's going to be there, very active. And I don't see the targets going down. In fact, they could definitely go up here. He's just going to be too involved. And I think you're right. They got off to a slow start in the passing game. If they are decent early, then you're looking at some good things immediately for CeeDee Lamb that just add those numbers in the front end to what he did in the back end last year. So, again, that's really the way you have to go because Justin Jefferson has a change at quarterback. Jamar Chase is great, but he still has to share a little bit with T. Higgins. Well, CeeDee Lamb, there's not much else there. Brandon Cooks has been okay and a fantasy producer, but it's a big drop-off. So Lamb is going to dominate targets. He's going to get open and put up a lot of numbers. So really the question is, Michelle, I think it's fair to take him as the top wide receiver on the board and the second overall player. Does he interest you at all ahead of Christian McCaffrey as the number one player on the board in half and full point PPR?
No, I think he should, right? I know it'd be so nerve-wracking. If you have the one-on-one, Christian McCaffrey just feels like the safest, easiest pick. Now, CMC did just turn 28 a couple days ago. And when you look at Lamb's production from week 6 through 18, when I said he averaged 23 fantasy points per game, that did outproduce Christian McCaffrey's 22 points per game last year. But to be fair, that's all of CMC's games from last year, and I'm only using week 6 through 18 for Lamb. And then also with Christian McCaffrey, he scored 21 touchdowns. Like, you have to expect that to go down. Yeah. Could he do it again? Yes. He's Christian McCaffrey. He's on a great offense, but like, you cannot assume he's going to score close to 21 touchdowns again this year. So if that were to happen, like, I'm not going to be surprised if CeeDee Lamb outscores him. It's really hard to find a running back that's as safe as Christian McCaffrey and can do what he can do. And just, it seems like such a difference maker in that running back spot. I don't know if I could pull the trigger. Would you consider it at all?
Well, I think maybe in full point PPR I would, because I think those numbers could be massive. And we talked about some record seasons. This could be a record season, perhaps in reception. So something to keep in mind. And I think as I go towards standard, I think it leans a little bit more toward McCaffrey just because of the touchdown upside. And even if he drops a few, I don't think Lamb is going to suddenly cut to like 13 or 14 touchdowns. I don't see that happening, where McCaffrey might drop to 18 TDs and you'd still be fine, right? So the TDs are the difference, but there's not much else I would take ahead of CeeDee Lamb. Probably nothing else at this point. McCaffrey Lamb is where I want to go in most drafts if I'm going 1-2.
Yep. I'm with you. And I don't think it's a mistake if you want to go CeeDee Lamb first. If you're bold enough with Christian McCaffrey's age and with Lamb's production, I think it's fair. I just don't think I'm bold enough to do it. Now with Jake Ferguson, tight end 9 in points per game last year, that's not great, right? Tight end 9 is not someone you're excited that you had at the end of the year, but he did have some really solid weeks. It just wasn't consistent. Now he was the second target on this team, 102 targets, 17% of the team's targets. It went Lamb, Ferguson, and then Cooks down at 13.4% of the team targets. I think he's going to be right back there as a second target this year. Like, who else is going to take those? Brandon Cooks is only getting older. He really didn't impress me last year, Brandon Cooks, and they didn't add anyone. So I think Jake Ferguson, if anything, he's going to be much more involved because that was his first year as a starter at tight end. Like, it could take a second to get used to that. And I do believe his targets will increase next year. Hopefully he can, bring in some more touchdowns. He only had 5 receiving touchdowns last year. I think that's key. He needs to increase those to more towards 8. But I think he'll be a really solid tight end pick this year.
Yeah, and he's the type of guy, when we've talked about if you're going to stash someone that's coming off an injury, like we mentioned a few names, but or a guy that with some upside with Pat Freiermuth or TJ Hawkinson, right? That would be the injury case. Then you're going to stash this player behind Ferguson. Like, Ferguson could be your solid starter early. There's not much behind him, but just keep in mind Luke Schoonmaker, Peyton Hendershot. There's some guys who can maybe cut his production. I don't see them doing it too much here. Ferguson has established himself as the best receiving option of that 3, but that's what I would do. I mean, again, I don't know if Ferguson has a lot of upside. You mentioned the QB 9. Not all positions are created equal. If you're the QB 9 or the wide receiver 9, it's a lot more exciting than if you're the tight end 9, just with your production. So I think you take Ferguson. I think you have a good point to say that he might be the last guy that we're looking at to just grab as a starter. And then you go after some of those upside guys later, maybe those Packers youngsters or the people I mentioned, or Brock Bowers. That's where you can look at here if you're kind of trying to hedge your bets at tight end, get a decent starter that you can put in early, but also be looking for some other upside. So I wouldn't say Ferguson has a ton of upside just because he's in a mini tight end committee, and you could see more factors in the wide receiver game involved here. But I just look at his value. I think he's about right. I'm not going to bump him up too much higher here from where he is right now. Tight end 9. That's kind of the parallel life he's living right now.
And I did so I looked at the, his way he was used last year, and if he was, being utilized more towards the end of the year, and he was. So he averaged 8 targets per game over the last 7 games of the season, including the playoffs, averaged just 5 targets per game from weeks 1 through 12. So as the season went on, they got more and more comfortable with Jake Ferguson. I like to see that. So maybe we see his target share increase next year. Again, the touchdowns have to increase, but and then he randomly scores 3 touchdowns in the wild card round, right? After only scoring 5 all year long. So those touchdowns can come. And I do think they'll use him more in the end zone this year. Now, looking at Ferguson, like you brought up, really the last great starter you can get, or not great, but last really solid starter. Now, him and David Njoku are kind of going back to back. Which one would you rather go with, Ferguson or David Njoku?
Well, I just know all the variables are the same for Ferguson, so I would stick with him versus Njoku. I just don't know. I mean, you don't have Joe Flacco thrown in Njoku. There's just too many things you got to figure out. I think the Browns also have some intriguing other wide receiver options right now, so they're not going to maybe force as much of David Njoku. Even a tight end, they could be a little bit more diversified. So, again, when I'm making that decision, I go with someone that can probably stay close to what their production can be based on their offense.
Yeah, I would go Ferguson as well. And I have a tough one for you because you just brought up all the variables changing for Njoku. We have Kyle Pitts here. A lot of things changing for him, particularly just the quarterback. But would you rather pay up for Kyle Pitts at 61 overall or take Ferguson about 3 rounds later and save on cost there?
Yeah, Kyle Pitts is interesting. We'll have him in depth here with our Falcons Fantasy Outlook later in the week here to close it. Yeah, I've been thinking about that as I've been analyzing that as much. And of course, Kyle Pitts is a name. He's going higher than his ADP because the industry is a little bit lower on him than the buzz and the new offense. So I think I'll just say this. I think Kyle Pitts is the high risk, high reward pick. Ferguson's the safer pick here. I would go personally. I like going for ceiling. So I would go for Kyle Pitts, but I think it's not bad if you're a little bit worried about Kyle Pitts and your values line up just to grab the 2 of these tight ends in the middle and see where we're at here, right? And you can maybe use one of the flex, do something like that if you're not sure. Because again, I don't think there's a lot of elite options, but I would say who could shoot up higher? Ferguson is probably going to stay static. Well, I think Kyle Pitts has a lot of room to grow in his particular offense. I would go Pitts over Ferguson, just barely though.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Pitts definitely has a way, way higher ceiling. To finish up our show on the Cowboys, we're going to hit on there's 2 more possible wide receivers that could be something this year. Maybe want to take them late in drafts. And also we cannot forget about Ezekiel Elliott coming back home to Dallas. Do we think he has anything left in the tank? We'll get into that right after the break. Are you watching Fox News or Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all the shouting. Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we have Brandon Cooks and Jalen Tolbert. Jalen Tolbert's getting some hype this offseason. I feel like he's the offseason hype guy, and it never really ends up happening, right? Brandon Cooks is going as wide receiver 59, 136 overall off the board. So one of your last picks in your draft. And then Jalen Tolbert in a normal draft, he's not going, right? He's going 241st overall, wide receiver 94. So unless you're in a super deep league, that's not happening. But would you be interested on taking either of these guys very late in your drafts?
I'm a little bit worried. I mean, Cooks is getting a little older, and so I'm not that invested in him. If I would take a shot on him. I'm not sure with Tolbert, with Ryan Flournoy, the rookie, and if they're going to give other guys opportunities. I mean, it's a pretty shaky hold on that third receiver spot here with Michael Gallup gone, and Tolbert has to show me a lot more before I'm going to trust him. So I think Cooks could have some value. Remember, Cooks tends to have some bigger games when things line up with the matchups, and then he can disappear in certain games, not be consistently used as a factor opposite Lamb. That makes Lamb even more attractive here at the top. So again, when you have that big a disparity, that just tells you that if we're going to think that way, right, then Lamb should be a very dominant receiver. So it makes me like Lamb even more. Again, I think you have to take a shot on Cooks if you're going to take a shot on either based on this, but I think that's about right. Wide receiver 5 for Cooks, and really not all on the radar with Tolbert, any of these other receivers.
Yeah, I think I'd just rather go with someone with more upside than Brandon
Yeah.
Cook. We kind of know what he is at this point. He's turning 31 in September. His targets did go up towards the end of the year as well. He had 8 targets in each of the last 3 games, including the playoffs, scored a touchdown in 3 of the last 4 games. But it's just going to be hard to know when it's his turn. It's really CeeDee Lamb, Jake Ferguson, and no one else here that I'm going to feel good about getting targets as a wide receiver or tight end. Now, at the running back position, though, maybe Ezekiel Elliott will get some targets back in this offense with Tony Pollard gone. So the Cowboys let Tony Pollard walk in free agency. They re-signed Ezekiel Elliott, who spent last year with the Patriots. He was a running back 39 in points per game last year, but he didn't really see the field all too much until later on when Ramondre Stevenson got hurt. He did finish weeks 13 through 18 as a running back 15 in points per game. That was when he was really leading the Patriots backfield there. What do you expect from Ezekiel? He turns 29 years old in July. Efficiency has really, really struggled the last 2 years. What kind of workload do you think he's going to get?
Yeah, there's no way. I don't think. I mean, 250 touches might be a real stretch for him if he can get that workload as an older back. And the interesting thing is, I think Elliott does a couple things really well that keep him on the field. He's still a very good pass protector. He's been like that since he was a rookie. That got him in the field immediately with Prescott. And then he's an okay pass catcher when you need him. So I think he can do a little bit of everything. I just don't see him like taking over like we've seen before. Just don't follow that trap. This is not pre-Pollard Elliott back in Dallas, right? They're going to be working these other guys. They just wanted a familiar guy to put out there in situations. I mean, Rico Dowdle, they're pretty decently high on, but they did add Royce Freeman. That doesn't do much for me. And Deuce Vaughn has got the coaching staff connection here that's still there, but Deuce Vaughn is tiny, so they're not going to give him any key touches here. So Elliott could be definitely valuable. I mean, he's a starting running back in an offense that is a little new, but he's got familiarity overall with everything else. I just don't expect too much from him. And I think when you look at RB40, I think that's where I kind of have him as a flex type play. But in a deeper league, you could look at him as an RB2 or starter. I just don't want to invest too much. It's not a player I'm particularly targeting here in 2024 either.
Mike McCarthy did say that he plans to use all these running backs back here. It's not going to be a one guy show. We'll see if that ends up happening. Pollard had 252 carries last year. Rico Dowdle was second with 89. I do think Zeke will heavily lead this team in snaps and carries. It's just how many can his body get to right now at his age? How efficient is it going to be? And it comes down to the touchdowns too, right? That's what hurt Tony Pollard last year. He got the touches. It's just he only scored 6 rushing touchdowns, and that kind of destroyed him for fantasy. Now looking to see where Zeke's going around. So he's going as RB40, which I think is very friendly for a starting running back, 116th overall. Looking at who he's going next to, like Gus Edwards, because right now he's expected to be the starter with the Chargers, kind of splitting with J.K. Dobbins if Dobbins can make it back. Who would you rather take? They're going back-to-back in drafts, Zeke or Gus Edwards?
I think I have to take Zeke. I mean, I just think his role is going to be a little bit bigger, especially if Dobbins can somewhat be involved. And it's not like Edwards is going to give you much in the passing game either. And Elliott's going to probably, whatever difference would be in the power rushing, Elliott probably makes up in the receiving between him and Edwards.
Now, I agree with you with Zeke there. One more, Zeke or at 126 overall, or Nick Chubb coming off that knee injury at 113th overall. You taking the upside with Chubb, but the injury, concerns, or going with the safety of Zeke?
No, I would go the upside with Chubb, 100%. I mean, the Browns really have been pretty quiet about how they've addressed their backfield. They added Donta Foreman, but not a lot to tell you that they're too worried about Chubb. So, yeah, I'm definitely believing in Chubb a little bit more because, again, he could be a league winner for me, whereas Ezekiel Elliott is probably just a guy I can plug into RB2 and flex, is not going to have a high ceiling.
So it seems like fantasy consensus believes that Rico Dowdle will be the running back 2 in this backfield over Royce Freeman, possibly because they have Dowdle at running back 48 price. Like I brought up, Zeke is at running back 40. He's not that far behind Zeke in drafts. 116th overall for Zeke, 147th overall for Dowdle. Would you consider Rico Dowdle late in your drafts, or Royce Freeman or Deuce Vaughn? Any of them interest you?
Yeah, I don't think you can go to Freeman. I mean, he's pretty much a late add-on. And what has he done recently? He's kind of just bounced around. That's what we've seen. And Dowdle has some upside again. They took so long to add it back. I think they just realized we got to get a little bit of veteran presence. We don't have a lot of experience back here. So I would say they've been hiring Dowdle for a while. He's been in the system before as well for a year. That's kind of put him in there. So I say Dowdle. I'll take a chance on him late. I just don't see this Cowboys backfield being very consistent the way they use it. Guys, whether it's Elliott or anyone else. So again, it's an unfortunate situation. I thought they would have a clear-cut shot at like a Jonathan Brooks in the draft or one of these free agents, but instead they didn't do that. So the Cowboys have made it really difficult on us to figure out this backfield a little bit in 2024.
They have. And also with the running backs, like this offensive line, who knows what it's going to look like?
Yeah.
Lost their center, lost left tackle. So it might be a little rough for the running backs this year. But Zeke at running back 40 costs, not the worst thing ever. If you need
No.
like a RB2 that, can put up, maybe 10 points per game on a regular basis. That is it for today's show. Thank you to you all for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Everydayers, Vinnie and I will be back on Wednesday talking about the Washington Commanders. Do not miss it. Bye, y'all.